And good morning. You're tuned in to the latest in the FDW webinars. Our current webinar is going to be an interesting one to people who are in the process of working with projects that span the analog world and the digital world. And I'm the really handsome guy in color on the left side of the screen there. I'm the technical trainer at FDW. My name is Kevin Peckham. And I am joined by the equally distinguished looking, although totally in gray, Brad Price, who is a senior product manager at Audinate. Audinate, as you probably are aware, is the company that has brought us Dante, and Dante's marvelous magic is something we have all encountered in one form or another, but not all of the customers are actually using it yet. And sometimes the reason they're not using it is that they may be scared off by the concept of, we've got a lot of good, perfectly good working analog stuff, and we're not ready to throw it away yet. So the good news is that for those of you involved in situations with those kinds of customers, especially large projects that do involve a lot of analog equipment, it is not only inexpensive, but also super simple to integrate analog equipment in nodes on a Dante network. And there's a lot of equipment on the market that facilitates that. But Brad's going to go through some really clever ones that are both simple and inexpensive. And so that is the topic that we're going to go through today. And we will take your questions in terms of housekeeping. We will have an opportunity for you to ask questions. Do that electronically. Don't try and call into us, but use your screens on GoToMeeting. Send those questions to me. I'll accumulate those. And at the end of the presentation, I'll get back online with Brad, and we'll walk through some of those questions. We'll make sure any of the questions you bring in are addressed. And also at the end of the program, if you are nice enough to take part in the survey, that will help us. We want to make these webinars meet your needs as well as possible. And the survey at the end of the webinar does a great job of helping us do that. They are also all recorded. So if you know other people that would benefit from hearing this information in this presentation today, no problem. These are going to stick around. There are links on the FDW website that will help you reconnect to them, but they stay up there indefinitely. So with all of that, which is more than you need probably, at this point I want to bring in Brad Price, my new best friend, who's joining us from the West Coast this morning. Now you can read the fine print there, and you can read about his distinguished background, but some of the things that are not listed there in great enough detail that you should know is that besides being a black and white, gray-looking fellow, very distinguished, who is the senior product manager at Audinate, Brad's also a killer rock and roll guitar player, and so he can relate to this industry on a lot of different levels. So not only that, he has had a very unique distinction we were just talking about earlier. He was a teaching assistant at MIT under Dr. Bose. And before we launch into things, tell us a little about it. I mean, that's a pretty unusual distinction. That's a pretty cool life experience.
Well, yeah, I was my youth was spent working in nightclubs and recording studios around Boston, while so that I could afford to eat and have a roof over my head while I went to MIT. So MIT became almost my hobby because I was doing it only in the afternoons because I had to be up till really late.
To do the important stuff.
But I did that, do the important stuff, and talk with the people who had better jokes. And so I did that at MIT. I did my thesis on vacuum tube distortion.
Oh wow, very good for guitar
player. And so yeah, I did that. And so anyway, I did my thesis on modeling of vacuum tube amp distortion. That was really fun. I got to use an actual old Fender amp as my guinea pig, and then create a nonlinear, only time forward model for how to do it. And now people use that model, but at the time I did that, there was no way to implement it. There was no way you could get a practical computer to do that sort of stuff in those days. So I didn't. And I went off and I did work developing things for guitars. I developed electronics for Alembic, and then I developed car stereo stuff for Phoenix Gold. And then I wound up with, through a crazy little career shift here and there, wound up at Audinate back at end of 2009, beginning of 2010. And I've stuck with them most all the time there, and had a very good time working at Audinate because the people are just so great.
Well, I think you're the perfect person then to introduce something that is not that is not going to be difficult. It's not going to be foreign. It's not going to be unfriendly to the analog world. So for a guy who did a thesis on tube distortion, this is right up your alley. But today we're going to look at a way to make analog very, very friendly, or make Dante very friendly to the analog world. So take us through that if you would. We're talking about the AVIO products from Audinate.
You bet. So first, let me tell you, for those who may or may not know about this, that what Audinate is, what Dante is, a little background. Dante is, of course, developed by Audinate. We are the parent company, and it's developed in Sydney, Australia. That's where we've got our galactic headquarters. We have offices in Portland and in Hong Kong and in London. And the thing that we developed here was really a way to do real-time audio over standard IP networks, and that was really important. We wanted to make sure that we didn't have to have some wild custom network with special gear or settings that would be incongruent with a regular computer network. No, we wanted it to be a regular computer network. And so the advancements in standards and so forth by 2006 had enabled us to do that. And so we're able now with Dante, and have for a long time, we can support up to 512 channels bidirectional per device, per port on a gigabit network. Latency is incredibly low, and it's fixed in a Dante system. Typical value is 1 millisecond, and what's important is it doesn't change. So that if you keep adding devices, adding more switches and so forth, your latency stays the same. We can support hundreds of devices on a single system. That's not a problem for a network system. You're not connecting devices point to point anymore. You're all plugging them into a switch, and they can be managed using software, and you can have huge systems. It's also self-discovering. So that means that when I plug Dante devices in on a network, I don't have to go through some special rigmarole to find them. I don't need to punch in special numbers. They simply show up in Dante software automatically when they're connected, and they're ready to use and start configuring and doing whatever you need to do. And part of this quality is that the connections between devices are all stored inside each device. So this means that if you power down a whole Dante setup, and let's say you pack it all up in the trunks and you move to the next show or something like that, when you plug it all back in, all the devices will reconnect the way they were the last time. So that's a real time saver, and is one of the ways that it helps recover from any sort of disaster that might occur. The system simply puts itself back together. And you can do this now with over 1,500 products, 1,500 different products, because we've got over 400 manufacturers on board with Dante. And the deal that we really make here is that this provides guaranteed interoperability. So it doesn't matter which of those products we're talking about or who it's from, I'll be able to interact with it, see what's going on. And the last thing I'd like to add about this too is that there is no audio quality to Dante. When people ask me sometimes, what does it sound like? It sounds like absolutely nothing, because it is absolutely bit perfect noise-free audio. We're just taking the audio bits that come in from one device, and then they're sent to another in the controlled time domain that Dante creates. So the audio that passes through it is completely unadulterated. So what does it do? Well, I told you before, it's virtually noise-free. Other advantages of Dante would include that you'd have no possibility of ground loops. The whole idea that the system has a single ground goes away. We don't need this any longer. It also means that I don't need to run huge amounts of cable to get a lot of channels going from place to place. I can use one cable. I can have everything going on that one cable, and it's tiny. It's about the diameter of a pencil. So no more big analog snakes are necessary. That's totally replaced with just a single cable. So it's super easy to install, really lightweight. I don't need heavy things to hold it up. I can run it through walls. In fact, it may already be in the walls for installation that you're doing. And it gives me unlimited routing possibilities. I don't need to worry about splitters or matching impedances or anything like that. I just simply click in software and I connect devices however I want them to be connected. And I do this using some really easy to use software that we provide. Dante Controller, it's free, and it talks to any Dante network in the world. It also really helps you overcome other problems that the analog world and some other digital things have had, which is to say that you don't have to worry about distance any longer. On a copper connection, you can do up to 300 feet on a single stretch of Cat5 or Cat6 between switches. Now, if you need to go farther than that, that's really not a problem. You can use switches to act as repeaters. and get it up there without really being an issue at all. Or you can use fiber. That's just another way to carry Ethernet. And so you can do that over really, really long distances. The Microsoft campus up in Redmond has massive fiber going over 10 kilometers that is driving a massive Dante system up there, over 5,000 channels. It keeps all my audio down in the digital domain. I'm never doing a conversion in the Dante system, so that means I don't have any degradation due to sample rate conversion or whatever I'm doing in there. This also means I can take advantage of existing IP infrastructure. If I've got an existing computer network and I work with IT, I can usually make Dante run along with it. So this might be a real advantage in some corporate settings and places like that where there's other things going on, and you don't want to have 2 physical networks in there. Dante also really finally solves clocking issues. Now that may not seem intuitive at first, how can a network do that? But what Dante really does is imposes time discipline over a network so that the network itself, using precision time protocol, now becomes essentially a canonical source for time. So by using that, we can sync that up to whatever source we want and do it ourselves. And this allows all devices on the network to have an absolutely consistent, clear, free of smear source for time. And you can even do this with legacy digital devices if you've got devices doing, say, MADI or things like that. We can use their clock and use that to drive the Dante system so everybody stays in perfect sync. Okay, well, I've rattled on about Dante for a little bit, but let's talk about the AVIO adapters. These are a brand new product line that we've just come out with this year. They're just hitting the shelves now. And what are they? Well, these are little adapters. There have been some other things in the market, but we really felt that there was a need to be filled here at the low end, where we wanted to make some small, really cost-effective devices that were going to help people get their older non-networked gear onto the network, because it has so many advantages, all those advantages with freedom from noise, great distances, all that stuff. And so we decided to develop these little products. So what do? Well, we've got models that do 1 or 2 channels of analog input to the network. That is, you take output, say, from a mixer, and you put it on the network. We've also got a companion module that's 1 or 2 channels of analog output from the network. So I can apply this to the analog inputs of a device. We also make a model which is AES-3 that gives us 2 channels bidirectional, as is the nature of AES-3. And similarly, we do 2 channels of bidirectional audio for USB. More on that one in a little while, because fans of Dante will know there's more than one way to get Dante in and out of a computer. So why do we do this? What does it do for us? Well, this really is for all our users out there. It lets them extend the useful life of their gear. If you've got analog gear or maybe other digital gear that's of a different format or something like that, it's perfectly good. There's nothing wrong with it. It sounds great. It may even have your favorite mic preamp and your favorite EQ in it. So why let that go? Well, you don't have to. So on an analog mixer, or signal processor, EQ, or I mentioned here AES-3 mic preamps. I know a few of those that are real near and dear to people's hearts. You can now extend that life. You don't have to leave it in the truck because it isn't going to work on the Dante system. It will work on the Dante system, and you'll be able to put those signals on there and route them and use them just like you would anything else. So I can put any kind of gear in my network setup now and expand my uses. If I've got analog powered speakers, I can do that. If I've got those mic preamps, I can do that. If I want to get audio from a PC or Mac, I can use that USB one. And that's a really interesting thing I'll talk about in a bit, because it allows you to do this without adding any software to a computer at all. So we did AVIO so that people were going to be able to take the gear they already have, they've already put investments into, and get out there and use it, and eliminate those last bits you've got running through installations of analog cable. You'd like to get rid of it, but you've got a couple analog devices. You can now replace that with a digital network connection. So here's a look at what these things are. This is a little 2-channel output. As you can see what they are, they're really compact. That whole thing is about 4 inches long, and the pigtails are about another foot or so. Made of really high quality components. This is welded polycarbonate. So they're really rugged and will take quite a beating before they finally give it up. Here's our 2-channel analog output. And we put little arrows on each one so that if you're having that existential question about, which way is up and what is in and what is out, the little arrows there will help tell you what this is. So this is an output. It's definitely spitting analog out that you can get from a network. We have them in one channel varieties. These are really great for little single channel devices, exactly like a powered speaker. There's the AES-3 module, bidirectional. We have, of course, the AES-3 standard type connectors on there too. And finally, the USB one. And as you can see, it looks just like the others. It just has a USB jack on it. But let's think about how we could use these things really, and that'll give you a good picture about what they do and what you might do with them. So here's an example of, say, a small house of worship. And this has been a totally analog setup, and they're now going to go digital, but they're not going to buy any additional gear other than AVIO adapters. So in this situation, they've taken, let's say, an analog mixer they've got at the back of a sanctuary, but instead of running that long output over analog, they're just going to now use AVIO and put that into a network switch. It doesn't have to be a fancy switch. It can be just about any gigabit switch. And from there, they can now use this to drive the main speakers in a sanctuary. And they're just using AVIO adapters to go into those powered speakers. And now really quickly, if they want to add an overflow room, they don't need to go and run additional analog cable. They can just use the network that's already in there, attach these AVIO connectors to it, and now get instant speakers in another part of the room. Could be really far away, but this doesn't matter because, again, distance is really not an issue on a network. And they can also connect a PC to the whole setup, and they can be doing things like playing out background music, recording sermons, even taking that recorded sermon and sending it off to a real-time streaming service. And there you'll note that I've added that the PC or Mac might be running Dante Virtual Sound Card. Now that's a software product we make that enables any Mac or PC to become a Dante endpoint. And it looks and behaves exactly like a regular sound card on your machine, lets you interface with any software you've got. That does audio, of course, in the normal way, just as if it were a physical sound card. So that's what we're showing here. So this would be a really simple way to migrate from an analog setup to a largely networked setup and save yourself some trouble, get better performance. Here's an example in a little conference room. And now this one, I'll talk about the AVIO USB, which is a little bit different from the others since it's not quite so simple. I mentioned just in the last slide that you can do Dante on a computer by installing software. We can do Dante Virtual Sound Card, and that creates a literally virtual sound card that looks like a physical one, but is speaking through the Ethernet interface. The AVIO USB gives you this ability without installing any software at all. It just appears to the computer to be a regular class-compliant 2-channel audio device that needs no extra drivers. So you just simply plug it into a PC, and voila, I've got an audio connection made, and the AVIO is already subscribed to whatever it needs to go to. So if the signals need to go to power speakers and need to receive signal from a microphone, those subscriptions are made and remembered by the AVIO USB so that when anybody comes in and plugs in their laptop to do a presentation, everything's connected for them. They can use the microphone, they can send their audio out from whatever they're doing. And it makes it really, really simple to do it as a network. Here's an example where we're trying to overcome some distance issues. So I've got speakers, they're placed really long distances away from areas I need to be. And so what do I do about this? In the past, of course, we ran really long analog cables and worried about noise and trying to find a break in them if anything happened. But this is another example of how that system can be left in place, but the distances replaced with network. So in this case, we're replacing everything that has to go over a long distance with just a couple of AVIO 2-channel analog outputs. And they're just going, in this case, it's showing 300 feet each one from the switch. Of course, if this were fiber, we could do much greater distances. We could instead of 300 feet, we could put 3 miles there, and that would work too. So this is an example of how I want to take a flexible event space, and I want to be able to overcome problems at distance and do it really inexpensively. Well, that's the basic information on AVIO. You can get them at Full Compass. They're available also at some other online retailers. And we've set up an AVIO page at Audinate. So if you just go to audinate.com/AVIO, you can learn more about them and get more information. And in this presentation, I believe that we're making available a file, which is the data sheet for them. So you can look up some more details about them if you're curious. And at this point, I think we need to move
We've
over
got
to
some,
our
yeah.
question. Yeah.
Brad, good job. And in the course of doing that, I thought of a couple things I wanted to ask, and I see a few people have written in with questions as well. So let me go back to some of your early slides there and just touch on a couple things. When you were talking about the 300-foot limitation, now I realize we're talking about Dante now, not the particular devices, not the limitation on the devices, but Dante in general. And you mentioned Cat 5 was okay. Is there any advantage to using Cat 6, Cat 6e, for example? Does that give us any?
Nope.
Okay.
They're just the same for most purposes. For gigabit, you need Cat 5e as a minimum, but that's basically everything you're going to find. And the only difference is that Cat 6 is a somewhat heavier cable, more expensive cable that has greater noise resistance. So you'd only recommend Cat 6 in an environment that had a really tremendous amount of electrical noise going on in it that you found an actual problem with. Generally speaking, Cat 5e cuts it all the time.
Okay, and now here's the part of the question that someone else wrote in about. They're asking about powering. So these devices, I presume they're all powered over the network. Is this power over Ethernet device?
That's correct. That's right.
And so, now, in that case, does the additional size of the conductors in the Cat 6 provide any benefit there, or do we have plenty of adequate current capacity in 5?
It's more than adequate. The current draw of AVIO devices is extremely small. They are generally under a watt, so that shouldn't be a problem. I'll also yes.
Go ahead, complete that one if you would. I'll take it a slightly different direction.
Oh, I was just going to say that when I wanted to add only about cable distance, that the 300-foot limit on Cat 5 or Cat 6 doesn't have to do with Dante. That's simply a specification for how those cables work. It's just networking. Dante, I want to make it clear that when you have Dante on a network, there's nothing special about it. That it really is just ordinary traffic, and so it behaves in the way ordinary traffic does. So any data connection would have trouble beyond 300 feet, and Dante would be included. So that's all I want to add about that. It's not special. Yeah.
And that is a perfect lead into the next question. We had someone that was interested in, when we use this alongside other data, that all sounds good until somebody gets too greedy and starts to suck up too much of the bandwidth. What sort of payload are we talking about for a Dante network that is running a heavy source load?
Well, clearly the number of channels determines the amount of data being used per port. So a few things to keep in mind about that. One is that the payload size, if you will, of audio data is often surprisingly small compared with the bandwidth available on gigabit. So a good rule of thumb is to think that 4 channels of audio will use up about 6 megabits per second. So when we do our math on all this, and we come out, we can find that 64 channels of audio, which is a typical top end for large consoles and things like that, is only consuming 100 megabits going full tilt. That is all channels engaged. So that tells us that we're only using 10% of our gigabit pipe. So really, a gigabit network can handle very large audio installations without problem. Now, if you want to have this coexist alongside other traffic, the only important part to do is to configure the switches involved to use QoS. This is quality of service. And what that does is whenever there's something being tested, it will elevate the status of Dante's audio and clock signals up to the top. So that means that they are pushed to the front of the queue, if you will, and other network traffic will have to wait. So that is a setting that's built into every managed switch and is easy to set up and would be used to deal with an issue like that. Now, it must be said that because audio is in fact not very big, in many of the settings that I've shown here, the number of channels we're talking about is quite small. It's 5, 6, 7, 8. And in things that small, it really doesn't make much of a difference any longer, because that is really just not a great amount of traffic. And the network will handle that without difficulty, 99.9999% of the time.
Yeah, okay, very good. And we did have someone that just wrote in while we were having that discussion. I think you talked through the cables pretty well, but the question was slightly different. They're asking about, is there a point where you recommend shielded network cable? And if so, when would that be?
When things don't work.
When all else fails,
I mean,
get some shield on the cable, yeah?
Yeah, that's Cat 6. So if you were in a really, let's say I'm in some environment that I suspect has a lot of electrical noise, and I run some Cat 5e, and I start having problems. Now, this wouldn't be just Dante problems. It would show up everywhere, right? Every network connection would be soured, and there's plenty of network tools that'll let me see that. If that were the case, I could try running Cat 6 and find out if that indeed addresses the problem, and it well may. But there is no other hard and fast rule about this. Some jobs specify Cat 6 just because they want it as a little bit of insurance, and that's fine. But basically, you can only tell that you need it by virtue of encountering the problem it solves.
So when someone's planning a network for this, we really don't need to be planning this for extraordinary shielding applications. I know a lot of times we're working with specifications from some manufacturers that absolutely stipulate their product will not work if it isn't shielded Cat cable. That's not the case here. This is really much more freedom of using what's in the wall already in most cases. A question regarding the way these devices come on in the self-discovering mode. If you're looking at the network and we hook up 6 of these devices, we've got them plugged in as I/O ports on ramps and off ramps on a Dante network. How do they actually come up as identified devices when we're looking at Dante controller initially?
Yeah. Well, every Dante device has a name, and we use standard network naming, the same naming that lets you see the name of a printer or the name of a computer. So what we do is every AVIO device gets a name that is a quick description of what it is, like 2-channel output, 2-channel input, whatever. And then a randomized set of digits. Well, they're not really random. What they are is they represent the MAC address of that particular one. And that way we wind up with a unique value for every one.
Okay,
and
that's
so
really,
when you,
so they are uniquely identified.
yeah, they're uniquely identified. In fact, Dante will not allow two identically named things simultaneously on the network. What it will do is it will dynamically, temporarily rename any offending devices and append them with numbers. And so when you see that, you know you need to really rename it because Dante is going to do ad hoc renaming just to prevent problems. So at any rate, in this case, that's not an issue. They're going to come up with unique names, and on a Dante system, the names are completely editable. So you can write over the names they start with, and you can put in whatever you want to have it be usefully descriptive.
Now we can make it logical and say this is the input by the door, or this is the output that's feeding the near fields, or exactly.
You can go further than that. In a Dante system, any device that has, you always have channels inside the device, however many there are, and you can label every channel. So if you want to say this channel is the overhead drum mic, this channel is the podium mic, fine. You can do all that too.
And my guess is for applications, these devices, because they're two or one channel in nature, they are going to get used in a lot of places that are doing exactly that. Podium microphones in large hotel conference room scenarios and things like that, where they have a lot of wall plates on the wall and a lot of situations where they're going to combine spaces or spread them out into different rooms. To me, those are the places where, having a whole kit bag full of these things around and go plug this into the Ethernet jack in that room in there, and suddenly you've got a place to plug in your mixer and make it work in that conference room.
Right.
A lot of ad hoc connections, so it can be done that way. Or certainly, permanent wiring. Absolutely, I can see these being used to make, as you say, analog mixers work. Certainly, analog monitoring systems work. Real good translation devices, and they don't wear out either. I mean, the standpoint that you buy some sorts of converters that you put in place, and once you no longer need that converter, it's money lost. These don't. I can see that these would be useful to just have around as utility devices indefinitely.
They can be, and they're inexpensive enough that we feel like you can purchase these, and if down the road you make a change so that you don't need one, like let's imagine that you replace an analog console with one that's got networking baked right in. So now you don't need it. Well, you're not out that much money. We wanted
Right.
to make sure that it wasn't a painful decision. These devices have list prices of $129 for the single channel devices and $169 for the two channel devices. So
Yeah.
very, very competitively priced.
Given the nature of interface devices nowadays, that really is very inexpensive. A couple of questions have to do with the analog specifications. So these are line level
Sure.
devices. You're not going to plug a microphone into this. It's not designed to take that. It doesn't have a mic preamp. It's not going to provide phantom power. Line level devices. But we're talking
Mm-hmm.
+4 line level devices. On the input specification sheet, I believe I saw that it took as much as a +24 peak acceptably on the input. Is
Yeah,
that right? That's
right.
pretty
They have.
professional.
Yep, we tried to do that, and the gains, input and output gains, depending on the module, are adjustable in software, so that when you connect when you plug these onto the network, and then you open up Dante Controller, you just have to look at an AVIO device and double click on it, and it brings up all the properties for the device. It does that with any Dante device, but you'll find in there that it exposes the gain controls. And it also
Oh,
exposes
excellent.
other controls for different AVIO devices. For example, in the AES3 module, we include sample rate conversion if you want it, so that if you want to maintain separate clock domains for AES3 and Dante, you just don't want them related, then the device will still work because you can
Oh,
have it
very
sample rate
interesting.
converted. Yeah,
That, in
but
fact,
you
was the
can.
next question. We had someone wrote in and asked that question exactly. They were interested in the AES AVIO
Yeah.
device, and they were asking about what sample rates were supported, and did they have to comply and conform to what was established as the standard on the Dante network. That's not the case. It has built-in sample rate conversion available.
It does sample rate conversion, and and you can turn that off too. So if you want the device to just be a straight pass through of bits, and you've got your clock aligned, however you're wishing to do that, then you can use it without sample rate conversion as well. And that control is also exposed in Dante Controller. So
Very
we've made it
interesting.
so that, yeah, and dealing with multiple clock systems is often a big issue. We generally with Dante don't do sample rate conversion ourselves. We leave it to manufacturers who need to do it or wish to do it. But we offer means for Dante networks to receive clock from different sources, and so that means that you can combine Dante and other digital technologies by defining a clock that everybody shares, and Dante makes that really easy, and now distributes that clock everywhere. So
Got it.
generally, we don't provide conversion, but we are in this case because we saw that as a real common use case with AES3. Don't want to have to go through the whole clocking rigmarole. Just want to plug the box in.
Perfect. And I've seen 2 or 3. This is a flurry of incoming questions now, so people are lighting up now. They're starting to think of applications. And this is a good one for us to clarify. It says, you mentioned using these for a podium microphone, but then also said that these are line level only. And that is
That's
confusing,
right.
I have to admit. So I'll take the blame for that one. It says, can you please explain how one would be used for a podium mic? So we need to make it clear. When we say a podium microphone source, we mean a podium microphone source run through a local preamp at the podium before it went into the
That would be true,
AVIO
right?
device.
At present,
Uh,
we don't have a mic pre version of AVIO. We just have line
and
level.
I should mention, in fairness, there are devices on the market that do that, and so I don't want there to be confusion. There are devices from some other manufacturers that do provide that functionality. So it's not to say that it's not a limitation of Dante. It's not
No,
a design limitation of the system. It's just in terms of the implementation of these particular devices. These are line level devices,
these are line
and
level
then there.
devices, and right.
Jim, if you can scroll the questions down, there was also a question. Someone was asking about a wall plate, and they were talking about a CL12. Yeah, I'm sorry, CL2. Are these CL2 listed for in-wall applications? And I believe the answer to that is no. These aren't designed to be used in the wall. I believe these are designed to be used externally. Now, maybe you know more detail
No,
on the CL2 question.
no, I don't. I'm not sure what the CL2 is. That's somebody's product name, but it's not ours.
No, that's a standard for devices that are actually going to be embedded in the wall
Oh,
inside of a box.
right.
And
Okay,
yeah,
no,
these devices
these are
are
not
not that way. These are designed to be dongles, basically, that would be external
my.
to an Ethernet connection that would come up on the wall. So
That is
what you'd
right.
have
My bad about that.
on the wall plate is an Ethernet connection.
Right,
And
and well, more than that, there are Dante wall plates that are made that do conform, that are created by several manufacturers. Aterotech and Bose sell wall plates, and there are several others coming on as well. So they do things like provide, maybe analog mic inputs, because they're not just a Dante converter; they've got other circuitry in them. So there are actually quite a spate of wall plates that have Dante that are out there on the market right now.
And yeah, the universe of these products takes a lot of forms. I think it's appropriate to think of these as handy utility devices that are in this dongle form that are going to plug into an existing Ethernet connection on a wall,
Mm-hmm.
or some other plate. There are devices from other manufacturers that take an entirely different form function here that are designed to
Sure.
fit in a quad box or something. And those are designed to put in the wall at a conference room, and they might have a microphone level input, so it might have a preamp in it, and they have output
That's right.
versions. There's different configurations. So as you go into the market, I know at our company here, we're selling probably at least 4 different companies' implementations, and they usually take one shape or the other along the contract commercial audio footprint of wall plate. It's like it's an I/O device built into a wall plate. These are
Yeah.
different, and frankly, kind of filling another niche here, because if somebody
Yeah.
has a mixer, what they really want to get out of that mixer is, let's get from analog into digital as quickly as possible, and now just treat it like another Ethernet source. So, yeah, it's really
Mm-hmm.
what's nice is it's a completing of the landscape of products as solution devices to be able to make this translation. And
Right. You're absolutely right. There are quite a few devices that do these same kinds of things, but that are in different forms, and that
exactly.
are built to different levels of ruggedness with different intended purposes. So I can go out and I can find a whole bunch of products that are multi-channel Dante, like analog in, that provide breakout boxes and so forth. And those things they're different. They're meant to be heavy duty, mounted in a rack, part of a tour or something like that. And these devices are not that. They're priced with that difference factored in. So
Absolutely, yeah. This is not an alternative to a stage box from Yamaha or something.
no,
This is a different kind of
no,
device. And
that's
at
exactly
this
right.
point, given the price point in particular, too, this is the kind of tool that somebody would actually have available to just provide utility use. In a large performance venue, for example, to be able to, hey, take this,
Absolutely.
go plug it
So
in that room down there that we don't normally use as an audio room, but plug it in their wall, it'll work. We can use that today.
that is exactly what we're hearing. That a lot of guys and gals, I should be totally clear, are buying these devices. Some with fixed purposes in mind, and then others who just say, this problem comes up randomly often enough that I just want to have 4 of these sitting in my box, so that if I'm
Yep.
at a job and a problem shows up, I got a solution that I can pull right out. And so it can be one of those save your bacon sorts of things where you've got a solution that didn't exist before and it was really small and just tucked right in with the rest of your tools.
And that's the way
So
I like it, because, quite frankly, I mean, we have
yeah.
that in the analog world, and somebody, especially you saw my age there, my gray hair gives me away. But
Mm-hmm.
if you've come from the analog world, you're used to being able to freely tap in and out of the network, basically, which is an analog signal distribution network, and you do it with all kinds of clip leads and XLR connectors and snakes and patch panels and various things.
Yep.
And
Yep.
and it's a pain, but it is also a comfort knowing that, yeah, I can pretty well get there from anywhere, anytime I need to do it. It's just a matter of getting the right kind of adapters and cables, and I can go to work. And then someone says, well, we're going to redo this facility as a Dante digital network, and all of a sudden, guys like me, flags start to go off and go, oh, geez, this is going to be difficult. It's going to be someday someone's going to want to have a audio connection down the hall, and all of a sudden I'm going to realize that I didn't design that in the network. It's a pain in the neck. This is going to be scary. It doesn't need to be. Yes, you may have
No.
a big stage box and you may have some digital components, but that doesn't mean you're limited to those are the only on-ramps and off-ramps. Devices like this make this actually easier than implementing a solution in the analog world. So that's the way I see it. I mean, this to me, this takes the scary out of transferring from the analog domain to the digital domain. You didn't leave behind all the convenience of being able to do these kind of ad hoc, last-minute tap into the system. And in fact, it's enhanced. You can do it better than ever before. One other question just popped up, by the way.
Yeah.
We had someone, I think you covered this, but I want to be sure we're clear on it. They said, is the AVIO USB device and a transmit only device? Now, I believe you said it was bidirectional,
No.
isn't that right?
Bidirectional.
See,
2 channels
yeah,
bidirectional.
it is 2 channels bidirectional. So
Yep.
that is both in and an out for your computer on the network. And
That's
one
right.
last thing, too, I don't know if,
Sure.
yeah, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, some people have asked us why we did the USB one when we have Dante Virtual Sound Card software. And you can buy Dante Virtual Sound Card really inexpensively. It's $30. The difference is that Dante Virtual Sound Card needs to be installed, licensed, and set up on your computer, and you need to set that up as an admin because it's got to open ports and do various things to do what it does. And so while that's all well and good, it requires real setup. And it means that if you're going to use a given application, you got to go through that setup again, just like you would with any sound card, right? You go to the application and tell it what sound card to use. We designed Dante AVIO or the AVIO USB rather, to solve the problem a different way. To say, okay, you need just a couple of channels of audio, no changes to the computer, nothing to install, nothing for the user to mess with. Just plug it in, and now that becomes a physical sound card on that device, and the device will just start to use it as most computers do automatically. If I plug in a new audio interface, it assumes you want to use it. And so it reverts things to that. And so it's really, really easy to set it up so that people can do presentations and conferencing and things like that. And we don't care what's on their computer, or we don't care what level of authority their login gives them, because it doesn't matter. That's why we did it.
Yeah, and it's perfect, as you say, for conference rooms and whole spaces and all those applications. Visiting salespeople that walk into a conference room and have to do a presentation absolutely makes sense. Brad, thank you. I think have addressed all the questions that showed up on my screen here, and we did so within the allotted 45 minutes. So that's a miracle.
Wow. That's good.
Thank you for joining me. So this has been a lot of fun, and I want people to understand they can still ask questions if they want to write to us here at FDW. They can send them to my attention if they wish, or they just pose them in general to FDW, and the customer service folks will get those routed. And either I will give an answer, or I'll have Brad give an answer, and we'll get that back to you. Today's presentation was recorded. It's available for future viewing. You can tell your friends about it. If they would like to check it out, they can certainly do it. But before you leave today, please do fill out the survey upon exiting. That will be a benefit to us to help make these better presentations in the future. And we did also have an attachment of some supporting information that is available to you to click on and download into your computer, and that will give you some of the spec sheets and things that we alluded to in the presentation. Brad, thanks so much for joining us, and we will do some more FDW presentations that I hope are as fun to do as this one. So thank you very much.
Well, I had a real good time. Thanks so much, Kevin. And well, you take care and have a great day.
Thank you.